When you get old, people stop seeing you, they stop hearing you. You become background noise in your own life. I spent 40 years breaking my back so my family could live better than I ever did. And when I finally retired, when all I wanted was a quiet place to grow old, they treated me like a burden. My son-in-law said his parents were moving into my cabin. He didn't even ask. He said, "If you don't like it, come back to the city." Like I was some old dog they could drag anywhere. That night, I sat alone on my porch, staring into the dark woods. And for the first time in my life, I realized something brutal. They didn't just forget what I'd done for them. They never cared in the first place. And when a man finally understands that, when he feels that cold truth settle in his bones, he stops asking for respect. He starts taking it back. My name's Ray Nelson. I turned 67 this spring, though most mornings my knees make it sound older. For 40 years I built things that outlived me. Bridges, offices, houses that still stand somewhere under someone else's name. That was my job: fix the cracks, reinforce what's weak, make sure nothing collapses. Funny how you can spend a lifetime doing that for the world and forget to do it for yourself. When I retired, I didn't throw a party. No cake, no gold watch, no last toast. I packed up my desk, turned in my badge, and drove home through rush hour traffic that felt endless. And halfway back, I realized something terrifying. I had nowhere I wanted to be. So I sold the house in Denver. The two-story place where my wife died, where every window carried her reflection even years later. I took what savings I had, plus my pension, and bought myself a quiet corner of nowhere. A small cabin west of Cody, Wyoming. 800 square feet of timber and dust, 12 miles from the nearest paved road. No neighbors, no sirens, no one to need anything from me ever again. The day I signed the papers, the realtor smiled like she was handing me salvation. "Congratulations, Mr. Nelson. You're officially a property owner in Park County property owner." That phrase hit deeper than she could know. I'd spent decades working for other people's property, building their homes, improving their foundations, while mine rotted with silence. Now I had something that was just mine. The drive out took 3 hours. Pavement gave way to gravel, gravel turned to dirt. My cell service blinked out somewhere past the county line. Good. The world had been talking too long. I remember the smell first, pine resin and cold air sharp enough to sting. When the cabin came into view, I parked the truck and just sat there. Elk grazed at the edge of the clearing, unafraid. They looked at me like I belonged. And maybe for the first time in my life, I did. Inside smelled of old smoke and sap. One big room with a kitchenette, a narrow hallway to a bathroom and small bedroom. I unpacked slow, deliberate, hammer on the pegboard, books lined on a single shelf, coffee pot placed where the morning sun would hit it. Every object found its place, every sound had space to breathe. When I finished, I brewed coffee I didn't need, carried it out to the porch, and watched the trees sway like an ocean of green. That was supposed to be the rest of my life. The next morning, I called my daughter. "Dad, you made it," she said, bright and warm through the speaker. "Signed the papers yesterday, sitting on the porch right now," I told her. "You finally did it." "I'm proud of you." Her pride carried warmth that ached inside my chest. For a second, everything felt right again. Then she mentioned him, Cornelius, my son-in-law, the man who'd never swung a hammer in his life, but loved telling other people how to work. "Cornelius has been stressed lately," she said softly. "The office is cutting positions." "He's worried," I almost laughed. "He'll be fine, Beulah. People like him always land on their feet." "Yeah," she sighed. "Still, he's been distant." We talked a little more, her students, her garden, and said good night. The call ended, but the mention of Cornelius hung in the air like smoke. 3 nights later, he called. No greeting, no small talk. "Dad," he started. He'd only ever called me that when he wanted something. "My parents lost their house. They'll stay with you for a bit." 2, maybe 3 months. I thought it was a joke. "With me?" I asked. "Cornelius, this place barely fits me. It's temporary. They just need time to figure things out. I bought this cabin for solitude. For retirement, well, maybe solitude's overrated." And then came the line that snapped something in me. "If you don't like it, come back to the city." He hung up before I could answer. I stared at the phone until the screen went black. Outside, the forest was quiet, the sky bleeding into dusk. All at once, the silence felt different, heavier, as if it belonged to someone else now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the old engineer's pad open in front of me, pen moving without thought. When things fall apart, you design a fix. That's what I'd done my whole life, so I started sketching, not buildings this time, but possibilities. Notes, lists, contingencies. How to make unwanted guests leave quickly. How to make them afraid to stay. Not violence. Never that. Just education, the kind only wilderness can teach. By dawn, the pages were full, the coffee had gone bitter in the pot, and my hand smelled of ink. I looked at the keys on the table. Yesterday they meant freedom. Now they meant control. That afternoon, I drove back to town. At the Yellowstone Ranger Station, a ranger with a sunburnt face greeted me. "Just moved up here," I said. "Bought a cabin off County Road 14. Wanted to ask about wildlife." He grinned. "Plenty of it. Bears, elk, wolves. Keep food sealed, don't leave scraps out." "Wolves?" I asked. "Yeah, they're shy but hungry this time of year. Smell food from miles away." He handed me a pamphlet. I thanked him like a nervous newcomer would. Across town, I stopped at a supply store. Hunting gear, cameras, camouflage. "Need wildlife cameras," I said. "Want to see what's wandering around my property." He showed me 2 models with night vision and motion sensors. I paid cash, no names, no trail. Back at the cabin, I set them up. One aimed at the driveway, another facing the porch, hidden but not invisible. I tested angles, adjusted for light. Precision came easy, peace required design. The next morning, I went to the butcher. 20 pounds of scraps, I said. Organ meat, trimmings. For dogs. The butcher wrapped the order in white paper without a blink. $45, he said. I paid, loaded the coolers, and drove home through rising wind. By late afternoon, I was in the clearing behind the cabin. The air smelled like blood and rain. I scattered the meat 30 yards upwind, spread in 3 piles. Not close enough to endanger the cabin, just enough to draw attention. Then I checked the breeze, calculated scent travel like a problem on a blueprint. Old habits die slow. When I finished, I went inside, locked the windows, turned off the lights, and whispered to no one. Lesson 1. That night I packed the truck and drove back to Denver. The house I hadn't sold yet, still half empty but useful. I set my laptop on the old dining table, opened the live feed from the cameras, and waited. Friday morning, right on schedule, a sedan appeared on screen. Leonard and Grace Harrison, Cornelius's parents, stepped out, dressed like tourists who'd lost the brochure. Grace wrinkled her nose. "This is where he lives now," she said. "At least it's free," Leonard muttered. They walked toward the porch, voices picked up on the mic. I leaned closer. Then Grace froze. "Leonard," she whispered. 3 grey shapes slipped from the tree line, wolves, lean and quiet, drawn by the scent. Leonard's face drained white. "Get in the car," he hissed. "Get in the car now." They ran, stumbling over roots. Doors slammed. The engine coughed alive and gravel sprayed as they sped away. The wolves, indifferent, lowered their heads to the meat. I watched them feed until they melted back into the woods. Then I poured myself coffee and waited for the call. It came 20 minutes later, Cornelius shouting so loud the speaker cracked. "What the hell did you do?" "My parents almost got attacked." "I didn't do anything," I said evenly. "This is wolf country. They live here. You baited them. You—" "Cornelius," I cut in, calm, "you sent people to my property without asking. Maybe next time you should check the local wildlife first." "You're insane." "No," I said, "I'm retired." And I hung up. The cabin feed showed the clearing empty again. Peaceful. For the first time in years, I smiled. The following morning, I sat on the porch, notebook open on my knee, planning what came next. Because that night, watching those wolves, I'd realized something important. For 40 years, I'd built safety for other people. Now I was learning how to build fear, not with violence, but with understanding. And fear, I was discovering, was a stronger foundation than trust. I looked out at the forest, the sunlight breaking through pine branches. The world had finally gone quiet again. But this time it wasn't peace, it was warning. And I was fine with that. For a week, the phone stayed quiet. No calls, no texts, no uninvited cars rolling up my driveway. Just birds in the morning and wind in the evenings. The forest felt like it had accepted me again, the way it had before they tried to take it. I woke early, drank coffee on the porch, and told myself maybe that was the end of it. Maybe the wolves had done what words never could. Maybe they understood now. But when peace comes too easy, I've learned to get suspicious. The first crack came one Wednesday afternoon. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but habit made me answer. Hello? Mr. Nelson, this is Linda Parsons. It took me a second to place her, my late wife's cousin. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. Hi, Linda, I said carefully. What's this about? Oh, I just wanted to check on you, she said. Cornelius called me. He's worried. Said you've been acting strange, living alone in the woods, talking about wolves. The words hit slow like cold water creeping under a door. He's concerned, she went on. He says you've become paranoid. That you're not yourself. I let a long silence stretch between us. Then I said, Linda, do you know how many times Cornelius has called me since I retired? Well, once, I cut in, to tell me his parents were moving into my cabin. So forgive me if his concern rings hollow. Her voice softened. Ray, I just thought maybe you needed company. I've got everything I need, I said, including peace. And I hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at the grain of the kitchen table. It wasn't about wolves anymore. Cornelius was building something else. A narrative. The next call came the following evening. A man I'd worked with 10 years ago. Hey, Ray, heard you've been having some trouble up there. You okay, buddy? Same phrasing, same concerned tone. I could almost hear Cornelius feeding them the script. By the third call, another relative, same story, I stopped answering altogether. Instead, I wrote everything down. Dates, times, who called, what they said. Every word went into my notebook. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger burns fast, and I needed cold fire for what came next. That weekend, Beulah called. Her voice was sharp, brittle. Dad, what did you do at that coffee shop? What coffee shop? With Leonard and Grace, she said. You humiliated them. In public, I frowned. I offered them a rental agreement. Fair terms. They refused. You tried to charge my in-laws rent. I offered them independence, I said quietly, something they've never earned. Her breath hitched through the line. Cornelius said you're losing it, that you're different. I'm finally myself, I said. That's what's different. There was a silence long enough for me to hear her breathe. Then she whispered, I don't recognize you anymore. She hung up before I could answer. That night I sat on the porch, listening to coyotes in the distance. I thought about every time I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. Every Christmas I'd worked overtime to buy them things they didn't need. Every insult I'd swallowed for the sake of family, and how it always ended the same, with me being treated like I owed them more. Number, not this time. The next morning I wrote an email. Short, formal. To David Thornton, attorney at law subject. Legal consultation regarding family pressure and property protection. Dear Mr. Thornton, I am a recently retired engineer, age 67, residing in Park County. I own a property recently purchased with retirement funds. Family members have begun exerting pressure to use or occupy said property without consent. I require legal guidance regarding asset protection, estate control, and potential defamation mitigation. Please advise on availability. Respectfully, Ray Nelson. I read it twice before hitting send. It wasn't emotional, it was strategic. If Cornelius wanted a war, I'd choose the battlefield. Thornton replied within 12 hours. Polite, efficient. He could meet Thursday in Cody. $300 an hour, worth every penny. In the days before our meeting, I gathered evidence, every call, every message. Printouts of property documents, screenshots of my security camera footage from the wolf incident. I labeled and cross-referenced each one like a man building a case, not a home. Thursday came grey and cold. Cody's main street was quiet, the kind of town where strangers still held doors. Thornton's office sat above a hardware store, wood-panelled, no nonsense. He looked like a man who'd been raised on dust and law books. Steady eyes, rancher's hands, suit jacket that didn't quite hide the calluses. We shook hands. "Mr. Nelson," he said, "I read your email. Let's start with the basics." For 90 minutes, I walked him through everything, from Cornelius's phone call to the false concern campaign. He listened, took notes, asked sharp questions. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "He's setting you up." I nodded once. "Common tactic," he continued. "Make you look unstable, then push for conservatorship. If they convince a court you can't manage your affairs, they can control your assets." "Control my cabin," I said. "Exactly. But you're a step ahead because you came here. We'll build a legal firewall." He suggested a revocable living trust, independent trustee. Everything owned by the trust, not me personally. If anyone tried to claim I was incompetent, the assets would already be protected. It would cost me $2,400 in fees. I wrote the check on the spot. Before I left, he said, "Document everything, Mr. Nelson. Even conversations that seem harmless. Especially those I already do," I said. He smiled. "Then you're going to be just fine." Driving back up the mountain that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Real control. The kind that doesn't raise its voice or break things, but simply outthinks the problem. That night, I opened my laptop and created folders. Legal evidence, communications. Financial, psychological warfare. Every file named, dated, backed up to cloud storage. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was engineering the outcome. 2 days later, Beulah called again. Her tone was softer this time, fragile. "Dad, I'm sorry I yelled. Cornelius has been under a lot of stress. His parents losing the house, everything." "Stress doesn't excuse manipulation," I said quietly. She hesitated. "There's more. He's been talking about estate planning. About how you should put the cabin in a family trust so it benefits everyone." My hand froze halfway to my coffee mug. "Whose idea was that?" "His," she admitted. "He said it'd help with taxes later. When I die." She didn't answer. I swallowed hard. "And what do you think?" "I think you should do what feels right. But he's trying to help, Dad." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Oh, I know exactly what he's trying to do." After we hung up, I wrote 6 new pages of notes. That night, I called Thornton. "Told you," he said, "the family trust is just his way to get control. Don't engage directly. Let me draft everything." He paused. "By the way, you might want to get a medical evaluation, just in case they try to claim you're not competent." "Already thought of that," I said. "I'll schedule one." A week later I did. Full physical, cognitive testing, everything. Dr. Chen, 50-something, sharp, clinical, had seen this before. When she asked why, I told her the truth. "I need proof that I'm not crazy. Because someone's trying to make me look that way." She gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "I'll give you documentation that says otherwise." 90 minutes of memory recall, drawing clocks, counting backward. I aced every test. At the end, she printed a letter. "Mr. Nelson is physically healthy, mentally competent, and fully capable of managing his affairs. No signs of dementia or confusion." I framed it, literally, hung it beside the front door. A reminder, not for guests but for myself, that truth has paper trails. 2 days later, a white SUV pulled up the driveway. Government plates. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, tablet in hand. "Mr. Nelson, I'm Margaret Willows from Adult Protective Services. May I speak with you?" I took a breath. "Of course. Come in." She walked through the cabin, glancing around. The place was spotless. Bills paid, fridge stocked, tools organized. She asked gentle questions. "Do you have trouble cooking or cleaning?" "No." "Any issues with memory?" I handed her Dr. Chen's letter. She read it, nodded slowly. "This is recent. 3 days ago." She smiled faintly. "That's the most prepared response I've had in months." She stayed 20 minutes, made notes, thanked me for my time, and left. 3 days later, Thornton called. "A PS report came through. Case closed. Unfounded complaint. Looks like Cornelius and his father filed it." I felt my stomach tighten. He was trying to strip me of my independence. He'd weaponized family law against me. But he'd failed. That night I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and went out to the porch. The stars hung low and hard, like nails in black wood. I thought about all the people who'd ever mistaken my patience for weakness, about how Cornelius thought this was a game of intimidation. He didn't understand. He wasn't fighting an old man. He was fighting an engineer who'd spent his entire life designing systems that don't break. And I was still building one. A week later, Thornton called again. "Ray, we've found something else," he said. "Leonard and Grace have been using your cabin address for mail. Social security letters, banking documents, benefits fraud. Most likely I looked out the window toward the mailbox by the road." "I'll check," I said. That afternoon I drove down and opened it carefully. 3 envelopes. Wyoming Department of Family Services. First Mountain Credit Union. Social Security Administration. All addressed to Leonard or Grace Harrison. I put on gloves, took pictures, sealed them in an evidence bag, drove back to the cabin and called Thornton. "Mail fraud confirmed," I said. He didn't even sound surprised. "We'll report it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Once this hits federal jurisdiction, Cornelius will have much bigger problems than you." I set the evidence bag on the kitchen table and sat staring at it. This wasn't about peace anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about design. Building a structure so complete that no one could ever tear it down again. And as I watched the sun sink behind the trees, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defending what was mine. I was taking it back, one piece, one lie, one careful line of evidence at a time. 3 weeks passed after I discovered the mail addressed to Leonard and Grace. The mountains had started turning gold at the edges, and the mornings carried that cold breath of late summer. I spent those days quietly, fixing small things around the cabin, pretending life was normal. But beneath that calm, I could feel the tension humming like a power line before it snaps. Every evening I sat on the porch with my coffee and waited. I knew something was moving behind the scenes, something I couldn't see yet, but I could feel it getting closer. Then Thornton called. His voice was steady as ever. He said the federal investigators had accepted the evidence. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Morrison had officially opened a file on Leonard and Grace. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at the mountains and listened to the wind slip between the trees. Federal, not local, not gossip, the real thing. "I'm not trying to ruin them," I said finally. "You're reporting a crime," Thornton replied. "That's not revenge, Ray. That's integrity." I sat there long after we hung up, the word repeating in my head. Integrity. I'd lived my whole life by it, worked hard, played fair, gave more than I took. And this is what it came to. Sitting in a cabin, proving to my own family that I wasn't crazy. But maybe that's the price of keeping your soul clean in a world that rewards the opposite. 2 days later, Morrison himself called. His voice was clipped, businesslike, not unkind. He asked when I'd first noticed the mail in their names. 6 weeks ago, I told him. He asked if I'd given them permission. Never, I said. He asked if I had proof. I told him about the security cameras. He paused for a second, maybe surprised, then asked me to send him the footage. I sent everything, dates, timestamps, even the audio of their voices. He said he'd be in touch. When the call ended, I realized something simple and strange. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There were people out there who saw the truth, who weren't blinded by family loyalty or manipulation. The law was slow, but it still worked, and that was enough to keep me breathing steady. A week later, Thornton called again, and this time his tone was different. More careful. "Ray," he said, "we found something else." He paused just long enough for me to know I wasn't going to like what came next. "Your son-in-law's house in Denver. 3 missed mortgage payments. He's in default. 8,400 behind. I didn't speak for a while. The puzzle started connecting itself in my head. Cornelius's parents had committed fraud using my address. He'd been behind on his own mortgage for months. He was counting on my cabin, I said quietly. "Yes," Thornton answered. "He wanted access to your property to use as collateral or maybe to sell later. Either way, when you blocked him, he ran out of rope. I could hear paper rustling on his end, a lawyer flipping through evidence that confirmed what my instincts already knew. He's desperate, Ray. Thornton continued, and desperate people do stupid things. But there's an option here, a way to control this before it spins out. He explained it calmly. The bank would likely sell the defaulted loan soon. I could purchase it quietly through a separate LLC managed by his firm. If I did, Cornelius would owe the debt to me, though he'd never know. At first it felt wrong, too cruel, too final. But the longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I didn't do it, the bank would foreclose, and Beulah would lose her home too. If I did it, I could control what happened next. I could protect her, even if she didn't know it yet. I said, do it. Quietly, 1 week later, the paperwork was done. $31,000 from my savings went through an intermediary to purchase the debt. A new company existed now on paper, Mountain Holdings LLC, and it owned Cornelius's mortgage. He received a letter from the bank saying his loan had been sold to another creditor. No names, no clues. Just the truth, hiding in plain sight. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at the documents, the notary stamps, the wire receipt. All those years of solving engineering problems had led me here, building a structure of silence strong enough to bury a liar. I wrote one word across the front of the folder, leverage. Then I went to bed and for the first time in months slept without waking. The next call came from Morrison. The federal investigation had progressed fast. Leonard and Grace's benefit applications listed my cabin as their residence, claiming Wyoming citizenship to collect state assistance. Both had signed. Both had lied. Morrison asked if I wanted restitution if they were convicted. I told him no. I didn't want their money. I just wanted distance. He said he understood. I hung up, poured a small bourbon, and walked out onto the porch. The forest was quiet, heavy with late summer heat. The air smelled like pine and dust. I looked at the empty clearing where they'd stood months earlier, judging my life, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I just felt done. But peace doesn't last long in my world. That evening, Beulah called. Her voice trembled. Dad, Cornelius just got a call. Federal agents are questioning his parents. He said you did this. He said you're destroying the family. I let the accusation sit for a second before answering. I didn't destroy anyone. I reported the truth. He's furious, Dad, she said. He said you're sick, that you're trying to tear everything apart. Honey, I said softly, sometimes when a man's drowning, he'll blame the person holding the rope. There was silence, then a small, broken whisper. I don't know what to believe anymore. I wanted to tell her to believe me, to trust her father, but I'd learned that truth doesn't need begging. You don't have to believe anyone, I said. Just look at the documents. They don't lie. We said goodbye quietly. When the call ended, I sat alone in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the porch rail. The old Ray would have wept. The new one just stared at the sky and waited for it to stop hurting. 3 nights later, headlights flashed down my driveway. My phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the live feed and saw him, Cornelius, stumbling out of his car, face red, fists clenched. I stepped outside before he could reach the porch, phone in hand, camera recording. You ruined my family, he shouted. Your family ruined themselves, I said. You set them up. You think you're clever. He took a step closer, veins pulsing in his neck. I'll take everything you have. You already tried, I said calmly. It didn't work. He froze for half a second, realizing I wasn't scared. You're being recorded, I added. Leave my property before I call the sheriff. He stood there, breathing hard, then turned and stormed off, gravel spraying as he drove away. I uploaded the footage immediately, labeled it Confrontation August 12th, and emailed a copy to Thornton. 10 minutes later, my lawyer replied, Good. Keep it safe. He's losing control. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the doorway. That's what losing power looks like. It's loud, messy, and desperate. The kind of noise that tells you your silence is working. A few days later, I decided it was time to tighten the screws. Through Mountain Holdings, we sent a formal notice of foreclosure to Cornelius's address. He was 90 days delinquent. Payment in full due within 30 days. I could almost hear his panic echoing across the miles. 2 days later, Beulah called again, her voice shaking. Dad, the bank sent us a letter. They're selling the house. Cornelius says the loan got sold to some company. It did, I said. Maybe this is your chance to see the truth for what it is. He's trying to fix it, she said weakly. He just needs time. He's had plenty of time, I said. He used it to dig deeper. She didn't answer, just cried softly. I wanted a normal life, she whispered. So did I said. But normal doesn't survive in a house built on lies. After the call, I sat by the window for hours. There's something haunting about realizing you're saving someone who might never thank you for it. But I kept going. I always finished my builds, no matter how long they took. I went digging through public records again, searching for what he'd done with the money. It didn't take long. A home equity line of credit, $35,000, taken out 8 months earlier in Cornelius's name only. Bueller's signature was missing. Colorado allows single-spouse HELOCs under certain rules, but they have to be disclosed. He hadn't told her. The withdrawals matched Leonard's gambling deposits almost exactly. Cornelius had bled his own wife's home to pay off his father's debts. I printed everything, stacked it neatly on my table, and stared at it until dawn. By morning, I texted Bueller again. Honey, come up this weekend. Alone. I need to show you something. She replied almost instantly. Cornelius has a work trip. I'll come Saturday. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Cleaned the cabin even though it was already clean. Brewed her favorite coffee. Printed every record. Labeled every folder. I wasn't planning to argue. I was planning to show her the kind of truth you can't deny. Saturday came with a bright sky and quiet air. Her car arrived around noon, dust trailing behind it on the dirt road. She stepped out looking pale, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. I hugged her. She didn't hug back. We ate first, chicken salad sandwiches, her mother's recipe. I wanted her to have something familiar before I broke everything else. When we finished, I set the folder on the table between us. She frowned. What is that? I said. It's your life, and what he's been doing with it. She read in silence. Page after page, her face changed. Confusion, disbelief, then horror. This isn't possible, she whispered. It's all public record, I said gently. Every dollar accounted for. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. He said we were fine. He said he was paying everything. He was paying, I said quietly. Just not the bills. She looked up at me, eyes wet. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. Probably not. I reached across the table and took her hand. I didn't build this to hurt you, sweetheart. I built it to protect you. We sat there a long time, the only sound the ticking of the old wall clock. Finally, she whispered, What happens now? I told her the truth. You have a choice. Stay or walk away. But if you walk, I'll make sure you have something solid to stand on. If you stay, you'll drown with him. Her lips trembled. What do you mean? If you leave him, I said, I'll forgive the mortgage debt. The house will be yours, free and clear. She stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. And if I don't? Then foreclosure proceeds as planned. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry again. I wanted to comfort her, but there are some truths you can't soften. You just have to let them burn. When she left later that afternoon, she didn't say goodbye, just got in her car and drove away. I stood on the porch, watching the dust rise behind her, and realized I might have just lost my daughter. But if that was the price for saving her from a man who would ruin her, I'd pay it without hesitation. 5 days later, Thornton called. Federal arrests were executed this morning, he said. Leonard and Grace are in custody. Likely plea deals coming. I nodded silently, even though he couldn't see me. Good, I said finally. It's time. A few hours later, Bueller called again, voice shaking. Dad, Cornelius just found out. He's panicking. He says you destroyed his family. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I just told the truth. She paused, her breath catching. I filed for divorce today. My throat tightened. You did the right thing. She sniffled softly. I want to come home. You already are, I said. The next morning, Cornelius made his final move. He tried to sell the house. The realtor ran the title search, found the mortgage belonged to Mountain Holdings, and called him with the bad news. He couldn't sell what he no longer controlled. In a panic, he called Thornton's office directly. "Please," he begged, "talk to whoever owns the loan. I'll make payments. I'll do anything." Thornton's voice, calm as a priest, replied, "You'll receive a letter tomorrow. Read it carefully before you decide." That letter went out overnight. It was short, polite, final. Full debt forgiveness, $43,400, if he signed divorce papers and a permanent legal waiver relinquishing all claims to my property or estate. He had 72 hours. He signed in 48. Thornton told me he looked hollow, unshaven, trembling. When it was over, Cornelius asked quietly, "Can I at least keep the house?" Thornton said, "The house belongs to your ex-wife now." And that was that. I didn't celebrate, didn't pour a drink or smile. I just sat outside that night while a storm rolled over the ridge, lightning flashing like a camera shutter against the dark. I listened to the thunder echo through the forest and realized something simple. For the first time since this began, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't scared either. I was free. True revenge isn't loud. It doesn't brag. It just makes sure the people who broke you learn what silence really feels like. 2 weeks later, I drove down to Cheyenne. The federal courthouse stood tall and cold against a gray sky. I didn't have to be there. No one asked me to come. But I needed to see it end with my own eyes. Leonard and Grace stood before the judge, smaller than I remembered, dressed in plain clothes, their faces hollow. The prosecutor laid out the facts, and every word sounded like another nail closing over the past. Fraud, false claims, mail tampering. I sat in the back row, hands folded, not moving, not smiling. The judge's voice carried through the quiet courtroom like a slow heartbeat. He said they had exploited systems meant for the poor, the disabled, the desperate. He said their actions were deliberate. He said they were lucky to be standing there and not facing years behind bars. 2 years of probation, $45,000 in restitution, permanent ban from state and federal benefits. The sound of the gavel was final. When they turned to leave, Leonard's eyes met mine. For a moment, neither of us blinked. I didn't feel hate, just distance, like looking across a canyon that no bridge could ever cross again. He looked away first. I walked out before they did. The hallway smelled like old wood and disinfectant. Outside, the air hit me cold and clean. I didn't look back. Some closures don't need words. A week later, Beulah called. Her voice was steadier, softer, tired but free in a way I hadn't heard in years. She said the divorce was final. She'd gone back to her maiden name, Nelson. She'd found a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Cody, near the elementary school where she'd just been hired as a 3rd-grade teacher. "It's not fancy," she said, "but it feels like mine." I told her that was all that mattered. She thanked me, though she didn't need to. I helped with the down payment, quietly, without making it about money or redemption. We spent that weekend painting the walls and assembling furniture. It wasn't much, just work, sweat, small talk. But there was something sacred in that simplicity. Every brushstroke felt like forgiveness in motion. The first night she slept there, I left late after helping her hang the last picture. As I drove back up the mountain, headlights carving through the dark, I realized how quiet my heart felt. Not peaceful yet, but close. Maybe peace wasn't something you find. Maybe it's something you earn after surviving enough noise. The days turned slow after that. I fell back into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Coffee at dawn, chopping wood, fixing things that didn't need fixing. The mountain finally stopped watching me like a stranger. One afternoon, Beulah came by with groceries and said she was thinking of getting a dog. "It's quiet in that house," she said. "Too quiet." I laughed and told her quiet was a luxury most people never earn. "You'll learn to like it," I said. She smiled in that small way that told me she was healing. We started doing Sunday dinners, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. We'd cook simple food, eat on the porch, talk about anything but the past. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was gentle. One evening, as we were chopping vegetables, she asked, "Do you think I'll ever trust anyone again?" I paused for a moment, knife hovering above the cutting board. "Trust doesn't die," I said. "It just gets cautious." And that's not a bad thing. The right people won't be afraid to earn it. She smiled faintly. When did you get so wise? I shrugged. Somewhere between losing everything and realizing it didn't matter. She laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded real. By late September, the nights grew colder. The mountains turned red and gold, and the elk came down lower through the trees. One evening, Beulah drove up to the cabin for dinner. I'd made spaghetti, her favorite when she was little. We ate on the porch, even though the wind had a bite to it. The sun slipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in orange and purple. The forest felt alive again, the way it did that first day I moved in, before everything went wrong. A herd of elk wandered into the clearing, moving slow, deliberate. Beulah smiled. "They're beautiful," she said. "That big one. Look at him." I nodded. "He's been coming around for years. I like to think he owns the place more than I do." We sat there in silence, listening to the wind through the pines. Then she said quietly, "Thank you, Dad." I turned to her. "For what?" "For everything," she said. "For fighting for me even when I didn't understand it. For not giving up when everyone else did." My throat tightened, but I just nodded. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You're my daughter." That's what fathers do. They stand in the fire so their kids don't have to. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "You could have walked away," she said, "protected yourself, stayed quiet." "That was never an option," I said. "Peace isn't worth anything if you have to buy it with someone else's pain." We watched the elk until the sky turned black and the air grew cold enough to see our breath. She left soon after, headlights cutting down the driveway until they disappeared into the trees. I stood there on the porch long after she was gone. The forest was silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that made you lonely. It was the kind that lets you breathe. Inside, the cabin smelled like pine and coffee and faint wood smoke. I looked around, at the tools lined perfectly on the pegboard, at the stack of books I still hadn't finished, at the framed letter from Dr. Chen near the door. Competent, sound mind, independent. Proof of something I'd always known but had to earn all over again. I poured myself one last cup of coffee, sat in the rocking chair, and listened to the wood creak under my weight. Outside, the forest stretched endless, patient. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, not mournful, just alive. I thought about everything that had happened since March, the betrayal, the manipulation, the threats, the paperwork, the endless nights of planning. And I realized something I hadn't before. Peace isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of dignity. It's sitting alone and knowing you didn't bend, even when it would have been easier. I stayed there for a long time, rocking slowly until the stars came out. The same stars I'd looked at the night I first arrived, when I thought I'd come here to escape the world. Turns out, I'd come here to face it, to end a lifetime of swallowing pride, to take back what was mine without lifting my voice or breaking a single law. That's the kind of revenge a man can live with. When I finally stood to go inside, I stopped at the door and looked back one last time. The clearing was quiet, the elk were gone. The mountains stood dark and still against the sky. I whispered, half to myself, half to the night, "It's over." And for once it really was. If you like this story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me, have you ever had to take back your peace from someone who stole it? Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of justice finally settling in.